This is Ares, the Greek god of war, the embodiment of the brutal, unyielding, and unstoppable force of battle itself. But in ancient Greece, cults of Ares were rare, and the details for how the ancients worshipped the god are actually pretty strangely lacking. What we do know confirms the god's violent associations and also his absence from the heart of the ancient Acropolis. From Homer onwards, Ares is identified with the mysterious name Enyalius. At Sparta, a bound statue of the war god Enyalius was in the center of the agora. This statue was said to enforce the permanent residence of the war god at Sparta in Laconia. The warlike Spartans wanted the god for themselves. They believed that because the god was bound, he would never run away from them and desert them to their enemies. What's interesting is that this kind of bound god was usually understood as an example of sympathetic magic. This magic would anchor the god firmly to the community and protect its interests. In a different way, sometimes this kind of bound image is interpreted as sort of prophylactic magic. Magic which would constrain the god's power and thus promote his opposite force, peace. Ares actually has a few of these binding stories. For example, Homer tells us that Otis and Ephialtes, the gigantic sons of Poseidon and Nymphomedea, overpowered the god and bound him in a brazen pot for 13 months until he was too weak to harm them. But the Greek god of war was not really a god of martial excellence like the Roman deity Mars. He had very few temples in ancient Greece, and his places of worship were usually far from population centers. For example, the Temple of Ares at the center of Athens in the Athenian Agora wasn't actually native to Athens. It was probably in the 4th century that it was transferred from the outlying deme of Acharnae. The most notable event which occurred in its history was actually its rededication by the Romans in the Augustan period. Now at Rome, Ares was identified with Mars, a god with a significantly different history and biography to the bloodthirsty god of Greece. Mars was the ancestor of the greatest city in the known world, according to the Romans, and that would be Rome. Greek Ares would have been unthinkable in the center of such a city. It was the Roman Mars, the Mars Ultor of Caesar Augustus, which brought the bloodthirsty god of war to a permanent place at the center of the city. In the Roman pantheon, next to Jupiter, Mars was the chief Roman god. In the city, Martius, where we get the English word March, was his time of year. The Feriae Marti on the 1st of March was both New Year's Day for the Roman calendar and the Dies Natalis, the birthday of the god. On the 1st, 9th, and 23rd of March, the famous group the Salii danced a sort of war dance in honor of Mars. The Salii, the name comes from the Latin word to dance, were groups of comrades, sometimes bound by oath, who supported presumptive political candidates and actually different factions in peacetime and in war. They wore the dress of an archaic Italian foot soldier, a painted tunic called the tunica picta, with a breastplate covered by the short military cloak, and the apex, a sort of conical felt cap with a spike or twig at the top of it, tied on with a bit of wool. In their right hand, they carried a spear. In their left hand, they carried one of the ancilla, which are archaic shields shaped like the figure 8. These shields were said to have fallen from heaven as a gift from Jupiter to the legendary king Numa Pompilius. At the festivals, they would process along the route and halt at certain spots. They would perform elaborate ritual dances, beating their shields with sticks in the style of Bronze Age warriors, all the while singing their hymn, the Carmen Saliare. All in all, the festivals to Mars in March were probably preparations for the upcoming campaigning season, the season for war. There were rituals for the benefit of horses, the equirria, trumpets, the tubalustrium, and even more obscure war implements that we don't even know the names to. While there has been some historical equivocation about the connection of Mars to agriculture, the divinity is now universally considered a war god. Before beginning a conflict, the Roman generals shook the sacred spears of Mars in the Regia, singing Mars Vigila. Probably these spears were the original embodiments, tools, or emblems of the god. Under the first emperor Augustus, the god obtained an important new title, and one which had no links to Greek myth, ritual, or religion: Ultor, Avenger. This title was in recognition of the victory over Julius Caesar's assassins. Mars Ultor's priest was a Flamen Martialis, and his sacred animals were the wolf and the picus, a woodpecker. In Roman myth, this anthropomorphized woodpecker, Picus, was the king of pre-Roman Italy, a son of Saturnus, and later he was transformed into a woodpecker by Circe, the famous witch who encountered Odysseus. As we have seen, things were a bit different in Greece. According to Homer, Ares was insatiate of battle. He couldn't stop fighting, and was the god of slaughter and war. In the Iliad, he was famed for his loud cry or shriek, and he was often accompanied by terror, rout, and strife: Deimos, Phobos, and Eris. Ares is actually the only god to kill a mortal directly in the poem. and is depicted stripping the armor from his victim, a violent act. His most common epithet is Brotoloigos, destroyer of men. But actually, in a strange turn of events, he doesn't actually fight all that well. First, it's the mortal hero Diomedes and then the goddess Athena who wound him and take him from the battlefield in pain. Homer tells us that every brave warrior is a growing shoot from Ares, and because the name is used as a noun, the word could have originated as a personification of the warrior's ecstasy. His geographical origin is also pretty interesting. In the Iliad, Ares Enyalius is associated with Thrace, an area that was regarded as wild and barbarous in the Greek world. According to Herodotus, the Scythians, another group to the north of Greece, were a people who worshipped no god but Ares. Currently, this is understood as a reference to the outsider status of the god in the Greek pantheon, and not Mars's actual travel as an immigrant god to Greece. The two divinities, one Greek, one Roman, exemplify stark differences in cultural attitudes towards war. Roman Mars suggests an emphasis on military prowess, reflected in organized cult practices and elaborate festivals. On the other hand, the Greek worship of Ares was less organized and exemplified a clearly negative perspective on the destructive aspects of conflict more generally. Okay, we'll leave it there. There's so much more to say, as always, but thank you very much for watching, both if you're new to the channel and if you're coming back, thank you very, very much. We have much more to come on this channel, and I look forward to it very much. I'll see you next time.